Punchdrunk's quite a big topic to talk about, so I'm just going to really try and keep it as succinct as I can. And I've also trying to regress 3 years back into when we did the R&D project. So I'm senior producer at Punchdrunk. I've been part of the company for 12 years. I wandered through a little door in Deptford into a tiny little installation that my friend Felix, who I didn't know at the time, had put on. It was the first little project he'd done in London. Punchdrunk was formed in 2000, and this was the first show that he'd done in London. I just happened to stumble through the door. It made a huge amount of sense to me, felt very timely, and just got involved and kind of went on the journey with the company, which went from a very... it's been a very organic growth from something that very much started from a place of passion and belief that we could do something quite radical and break a lot of the conventions of theatre. And through that, the projects just slowly got kind of bigger and bigger, to the point where we just closed this show, which was on in London. It ran for a year from June last year to July this year. It was in a postal sorting office in Paddington that we converted into the world of Temple Studios, which was a 1960s Hollywood world that we imagined that was full of all the dysfunctionalness and darkness that the Hollywood studio system has, and complete with one floor of the building, which there was basically 4 floors of the building, about 150,000 square foot, and the top floor of the building we turned into the desert, which was at the fringes of the kind of the town where the Hollywood studio was based. Our shows, they're kind of multi-sensory experiences that we're trying to create. We don't always work in this scale, but we're best known for taking over these buildings, transforming them into these kind of worlds that we want people to explore. And they're sort of seen, some people see them as an art installation, some people see it as a theatre. We're kind of really striving for environments where the audiences are kind of in some way empowered to engage with the work in the way that they feels most natural and comfortable to them. Whether it's we don't tell them that they have to follow the performers around the space. They can lose themselves in the detail. They can lose themselves in the sound design. If they really want to, they can lose themselves sitting in our bars. There's all different ways into telling the story that we're trying to create, and it's not necessarily one story we're trying to tell, and it's quite often fragmented in the way that someone's going to experience it. This little comment, which I'll just let people read, I think probably in many ways to me sums up what we do best, and it's from a show that we did in the States. Well, it originally was in 2003 in London, but we took it to the States in 2009. I went to Boston, and as you'll kind of see there, what he's getting at is that everyone's experience is very kind of unique, and you need to, in our heads, you just need to go with your own experience and not be so worried about what other people are getting from the work. And that's one thing that's very much in all of the things that we're doing. As I say, Sleep No More was in Boston, and then it transferred over to New York, and it's been opened in New York in 2011. I think it was April 2011. It's still running. It's been running for 3.5 years now. I think it's had close to 750,000 audience through it. It's now playing 9 times a week, and it's 400 audience at a time. Our Sleep No More is a retelling of Macbeth, but set in a very kind of Hitchcock film noir inspired world. It's across 6 floors of a warehouse in West Chelsea in New York, in Manhattan. And as with everything, it's a mixture of big epic sets down to really tight detail. There's a lot of clues in here. Also within these big shows, we always strive for intimacy. There's moments which we call one-on-ones, where one audience member might be taken by a performer behind a locked door, and there is a little very succinct 3-minute theatrical experience that happens with the whole theatrical arc that's also happening across the whole show over the 3 hours that we're playing out. And we kind of very much believe that just that one little moment that only one person sees can actually infect the whole world of everything else that's going on, and really builds curiosity and makes people dig more and more. As I said, we always have bars in our shows. The bars are really important, not just because it means people can get a drink, but conversation is really important because your experience is fragmented. And it's impossible to see everything. It can lead to some very, just really kind of interesting conversations where they come back to these spaces and they talk, and it helps them understand the bigger narrative of what's going on and what we're trying to say. Also, because these big shows, they don't have an interval, and there's this need for people to go back and take a break when people need to. We're not going to tell someone when that needs to happen. Some people choose to be in our shows for the full 3 hours that they're going on. One thing I didn't mention, on these big shows, we generally work on a process of 3 loops. So things repeat themselves every hour, which is another way which helps people kind of slowly piece together what's going on. In these shows, we have a tendency to generally put our audiences in masks. This allows the audiences to very much distinguish themselves from the performers. The only people in the worlds of these shows, once you're kind of out of the bars are spaces where you can take your mask off and you can talk, but in the main part of the shows, it's really important for us the audience aren't talking. The mask manages to do that. It covers the mouth. It also does a lot of things. It stops you reading other people's facial expressions, so it allows you to start internalizing your own thoughts. Stops you worrying what someone else thinks of a scene. If you're not enjoying it, you can drift off and find something else that does engage with you, or get lost somewhere else in it. I can talk for hours about the masks. I'm not going to do that. But I needed to just give you a general overview of what we do in case you weren't aware of our work, because all of that thinking of where we'd got to as a company in 2011 when we opened Sleep No More went into the proposal that we put in for the first round of the Digital R&D Fund for the Arts. And in essence, what we were playing around, we came up with this ridiculous name here, Remote and Real World Interconnected Theatrical Immersion. I don't really know what that means, but it's what we called it. But it was us trying to work out, so obviously something like NT Live, it works really well for the National Theatre in terms of growing the reach of their audience for people who can't physically get into that theatre. We were playing around with ideas of what would an online version of a Punchdrunk project look like. And we were partnered up with Media Lab at MIT, and just had an incredible group of people to work with. And we probably ended up trying to do about 10 projects in one. But as I say, in essence, we were trying to get to this thing of what could an immersive online experience be like? What could be a kind of window into the world of our shows? We ended up with this situation whereby there was going to be an online participant who was paired with somebody that was in the real environment of Sleep No More, embedded within an actual show that was going on. The online experience was obviously the area that we knew least about. We had least kind of experience in it. We've always, as a company, been curious about online, been curious about games. We've always had people coming back to us telling us that game mechanics is very much at play in the work that we're doing, and the conversations were going around. Up to this point, there'd been a couple of projects that we'd played around with. There was something called Last Will, which we did, which was a little bit of a prototype of trying to play with what a gaming experience could be in Punchdrunk. But we were kind of moving into what this online experience could be. It obviously needed a world to explore. This is a graphic representation of the world of Sleep No More online, which was being experienced, which had a lot of the elements, well, it had all of the elements of the world of Sleep No More in its physical incarnation, but it also had areas that were impossible to get to in the real world. And that was one of the things we were playing around, that online might be able to go to places that somewhere in the real space couldn't go to. Obviously, we were limited for lots of different reasons, time, money, just probably time and money being the main things as to what we could actually realize as an online world we learned very quickly that that wasn't necessarily going to be a graphic representation of our worlds. And so what we ended up with, this was actually the first screen that someone got to if they were an online player in our experience. It was just blank. There was nothing there. In some ways, it mirrors the first experience that a lot of people have in our bigger shows, is that we'll quite often send them into what we kind of call as a decompression chamber, and it's quite often a darkened maze, generally with as little or no light as possible. It's trying to kind of break down some barriers that people might have, take them out of their comfort zone a little bit. Playing around with similar ideas with this online thing, that first thing you're going to get to is nothing. There was actually a little flashing cursor. And we played around with this idea where we actually went back to early text adventures, some of the first things, the sort of storytelling things that were actually done online. So it was, for the online person, a lot of their experience was text. And obviously there's been huge developments in artificial intelligence now, and so there was a lot of stuff that could be pre-programmed, and it was a lot less like the old days of text adventures where you would just get stuck going round and round in a circle because you couldn't work out what to say to the machine to make it move forward. And I said, and there were various different graphics that represented and photos that kind of led people into snapshots of where they might be. See here, this one's where you enter the hotel and you had an image that was from the hotel in the real world. There were moments which I'll get onto whereby content and live moments would interrupt your text experience. But for a lot of the time, the person was just playing was text, and it was allowing we were kind of interested in this idea that people's imaginations online might be more powerful than us just feeding them with imagery already. So in the real world, obviously we have masks in our shows. So the mask was obviously going to need to feature in this. It ended up, we played around with bone conducting headphones. There was various different sensors in there. We were trying to track various bits of biometric data, which in our heads was going to influence the colour of the screens and the emotions of what was going on someone online once these two people paired up. We didn't necessarily get through all of those elements of this project. I don't really know what that is. It's something amazing that the MIT people made that made it all work. And then we had these moments where in our project it was really important that these two seemingly individuals there was certain points where they were going to actually need to cross over and communicate with each other to be able to unlock what the bigger stories and narratives that we were trying to tell. And I should actually have just said that in this project was actually uncovering a narrative that's hinted at in the physical version of Sleep No More that plays out in New York. We'd never actually explored it before. And so this project allowed us to explore a character that, as I said, that's only hinted at, that was never there in the actual show. So these portal connections, one of them was this incredible typewriter that was created, which the person online, and they were in different places all over the world. There were people sitting in London typing on their computer screens, which actually made this typewriter, which was embedded in this lawyer's office within our kind of film noir 40s world of this of the McKittrick Hotel in New York. It would come alive, so that you had the online participant would find this room, and then suddenly the typewriter would start working. And this was a kind of these portals, some of them were fully two-way. We had a cupboard somewhere where someone could actually speak and the person online would actually hear them in real time. This was kind of a two-way thing, but it was the person online could hear the person in the real world speaking. The person in the real world couldn't type on this typewriter. So it was the person online could communicate by typing, and the person in the space could speak, and they could communicate that way. And it was kind of fun because with so much of our things, we don't like spelling it out to people, so we let them try to work that out. I'm trying to think, there was one of the other portals, we had a mirror. In our Macduff's characters, our Lady Macduff is totally crazy and is totally superstitious and has covered her entire house in mirrors. Most of them are turned around. And in this one space where there were mirrors everywhere, one of these mirrors we replaced out with a screen. And if we could get if the online player could get the real world player in this room at the right time, or could actually physically get them there, they could then type on their computer, and in the dust on this mirror, a message would come up to them. We had a bookcase where a book could, the online player could trigger a book that would fly off the bookcase, and inside that book there was a message that was going to help this person move around the space. I said it was a lot of elements. It was, as I said, it was more than one project. It was so many projects. But the MIT guys were great, and they actually, just anything we kind of came up with, they said, yep, we know how to do that, and they kind of made it happen. So how did we do it? It was 6 months from conception to delivery. There were 3 teams. This is where it got even more complicated, because we had one team in London, which was basically had the overview of the creative side of it and was generating the actual content of what we were going to do. We had myself, who was very much at that time embedded in Sleep No More in New York, and I was trying to work out how we were going to put this project into a show that at that point was running 8 times a week and had 400 audience a night, and how I was going to make sure what we were going to do was not going to destroy this project that it was happening on a daily basis. And then we had the Media Lab team in Boston who were busy working on the technical side of things. So just trying to communicate all that was a project in itself. We kind of made it happen through a lot of Skype calls. This is kind of what we did. Again, don't know whether I can't explain this in the time we've got now. In the middle of it, you'll see something called Cauldron in brackets. It says Master Cauldron. Within this project, because our online world was going to have as many infinite possibilities of exploring it as our real world place, and we were going to need to fire video streaming random intervals. One of the Media Lab guys worked out that there wasn't actually a piece of software that could actually do any of that. So before we could do anything, they had to actually write a piece of software which they called Cauldron, which would allow the online part of the experience actually to work. This was when we actually ran the thing for the test period. We did 5 days of testing where we had 5 online people and 5 people in the real world every night for 5 nights. So it's 25 pairs of people. We had as many MIT people buried in one tiny little closet in the show trying to make the whole thing work. I'm just going to put this quick slide and these series of slides and just talk through. Straight off the back of doing this, we did a little presentation to a transmedia group in New York, and we literally did it 2 days after it. And one of the things that they very much wanted us to sort of talk about were the successes and challenges of the project. And it was very much obviously important. This is an R&D project, and that's what we were funded to do. And sharing those things is really important for trying to make this work move forward. So connections. People did connect. We did what we tried to do. We did have people in London talking to someone in the world of the show. How successful that was depended on the individuals that were doing it, on the technology to a certain extent. We ended up having to give it a lot more support than we originally imagined we would. A lot of the AI didn't work as well, or we hadn't managed to load up enough information in it that meant we pretty much had to have an operator per pair of people to actually facilitate this and facilitate the storytelling we were doing. Online, again, kind of a success for us. We created some online environment for people to explore. One of our biggest the biggest challenges we felt while we were actually testing was that we were so lost in delivering the real part of the project, which in itself was very complicated, that we didn't really have enough time to notate the online world in the way that we would if we were creating a piece of theatre and wanted to. And also kind of just like learn that simple thing of that we don't have eyes looking over someone's shoulder while they're sitting on their computer at home to really understand what they're doing. And as theatre makers and making theatre in a real environment, as much as we may be hidden we can assess what's going on with our audiences and adapt things. Technology, as I said, there were loads of successes within this. I mean, a whole back end got created, this thing called Cauldron that actually allowed things to happen. For me personally, as someone that is trying to make work and actually is so much thinking about what an experience is going to be like for an audience, I found a lot of the technology hugely frustrating because we were playing around with so many new ideas and so often it wasn't quite ready. And because of the complexity of this project, in the fact that we were working across global boundaries, meant that our testing was really limited, and what we actually presented was really our beta test. Like, we wished that we could have done those 5 days and then actually then got on with doing what we were trying to do, but it just wasn't practical with the funds that were available and the time and everything. So I said that was hugely kind of frustrating at times. There's obviously technology from the experience that I have had with it. The lead times on developing technology, and especially like online presence, it's a very different process providing that information. You have to make a lot of decisions up front in advance as to how you want it to function and how you want it, the framework of it. As theatre makers, and especially in the very organic way that we create theatre at Punchdrunk, it's kind of at odds. We're very much, something isn't finished until it's finished. And when it's physical and real, you can play with it continually. Something like The Drowned Man, which ran for a year, we were tweaking with that till the day it ended. And we kind of can, and we can make quite radical changes to it. Something like The Drowned Man, we changed the whole entrance experience for an audience member during our preview period. Like, the route changed, everything changed about it. Online, and once you've made a decision you're going in a particular route, you're kind of stuck with it. And so if you're not making sensible decisions in the way that you're creating it, you're kind of a bit constrained. We're doing bits of consultancy now with, we're doing some consultancy with Extant, that are the blind-led theatre group that are doing a project in the latest wave. And one of the big things I always say to them is, like, try and just make sure the technology is as robust as it can be at the point you're actually getting in to kind of create the work, and also just kind of think sensibly about what you want it to be to start with. Invisibility, we made it invisible to the non-playing audience in the real world. Had no idea when we did these 5 days of testing that anything weird was going on in our show. We probably made it too invisible to the person in the real world who was trying to find these things. Like, I don't actually think one person found the mirror. It was so embedded in our world and so perfectly seamlessly put in there. People would quite often be looking for this mirror that was going to write to them. They just couldn't find it in this sea of mirrors that we created. So, I mean, that was just a very peculiar thing to our project, and that was something we had to. We're so worried about our audience's experience that we needed to make sure that this didn't destroy our general audience's experience as well. Audience behaviour, we learnt loads around that, as I kind of touched on. The big kind of thing that someone sitting in the comfort of their own home, very isolated, that's very different. They're having a very different experience, and we can interact with that experience less than we can and interfere with it than we can with someone in the real world. We learned stuff around information and induction. You can totally change how someone engages with what you're doing by the information you give them at the beginning. There was obviously an element of game. There was a game-like qualities to what was going on with the person in the real world. And on the first couple of testings, we maybe set it up too much like a game, and then someone approached it as a game, and they didn't get the storytelling we were trying to do. And so we were playing around with things like that. And it was an amazing learning opportunity. We learned huge amounts about it, huge amounts about how we'd approach using technology in the future. I'm going to try and very quickly sum up in like 3 or 4 minutes what we learned from there and things that we've maybe done since that project. I'm just going to straight away touch on a project that we did last year, which kind of went under the radar with a lot of people. It was a little project we did at the Borough Festival in Suffolk. It was called the Borough, and it was an audio experience for one person at a time embedded into the streets of Borough. And Borough was a lot of the inspiration for Benjamin Britten's Peter Grimes opera, which was based on something called The Borough, which was a poem that was written by George Crabbe, very much set in a similar world to Borough. And we created this project. As I said, it's one person at a time. It was an audio piece, as you'll see here. This person has headphones on, and they were lost exploring the world of the town. And within the journey, they would encounter different things. At one point, they'd let themselves into a fishing hut on a beach. Slowly, this sort of story started unraveling. They would let themselves into Ellen's house. Ellen is Peter Grimes' kind of love interest in the story. In this space, up until this point, they'd never seen a performer. And when they went into this room, it was empty. And you'll see a cupboard in the corner. There was bits of binaural sound that came in that made them aware that someone was coming up the stairs. They had to hide in the cupboard. And then they had their first kind of encounter with a performer. And during this piece, so the whole thing, we needed to be able to know what someone was hearing on their audio, and I took all of the lessons that we'd learned on the R&D project, whereby we were constantly waiting for technology to work, and meant that when we approached this project, all I wanted was robust technology. I didn't want to play around with sensors. I didn't want anything that might go wrong. For me, my audience member had to hear audio for 55 minutes the whole time, and so I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and we actually ended up using very crude short-range radio transmission to allow us to hear into things. But it meant that from the moment we started rehearsals on this project, everything worked, and we understood how it worked, and we understood what the limits of the technology were, rather than being in a situation where people are telling us, it will do this, and we never get to see it do that, and then it's too late for us to make a piece of theatre. So we put all of that thinking in. Or just in this, you ended up on a marsh on your own, and then you were thrown out, and you had an entire village coming to lynch you. The future generally for us, we're most fascinated, but that project there, we were very much blurring the lines between what's real and what wasn't. It was embedded in a town. We were trying to theatricalize a town. We were trying to get out of being in the confines of a building and these heavily controlled environments that we create. We're so much more interested in what happens when you start to bring in some element of randomness, and how you can use that randomness to actually make your storytelling even more powerful. With something like Peter Grimes is about it's about not a very nice man, but it's essentially about a town turning against an individual, and we could play up on all of that. So as I said, this blurring of the lines is really important to us. Therefore, it means with what reality is for everybody these days, technology has to be part of our future, because it's part of everybody else's future. So it's always there within the projects that we're thinking up and developing. I can't talk hugely at length about the things that we're doing, because they are kind of being developed, but we did take some interesting approaches at how we were going to document the drowned man, which has just happened, and in the future, hopefully, there'll be a lot more interactive ways that we could show people and demonstrate the worlds that we've created. I'll leave that to your imaginations of what that is. I just can't tell you exactly what it is yet. We have a whole section of the company called Enrichment, which is educational projects. A lot of these things goes into schools, and we get to really play. We're playing around a lot of time with little 7, 8-year-olds. We create these little worlds that they explore. There's always sensor technology in those now. They're brilliant devices to use, and we can use them in a really relaxed way where no one's really judging what we're doing. And we know if we failed, because the kids don't tell us that they had a good time. We're constantly interested in game mechanics and the way that you can gamify the things that we're doing. And again, there's some projects that are active at the moment that I can't really explain in length what they're doing, but it's always been an area of interest for us, and it's there, and those online versions of it should hopefully start to materialise. And I think I'll wrap up there.
Great, thank you.